Good morning. I'm Onno Roel, the General Manager for the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, and I have the great honor and pleasure to moderate our fantastic panel this morning, a panel on being prepared to adapt for climate change. As the negotiators at COP26 are running overtime this morning to negotiate a deal to try and stop climate change from going beyond 1.5 degrees, 200 million people, according to estimates, already live in areas that are marginal in terms of being able to survive thanks to the climate change that is happening today. These people live in coastal areas, these people live on islands, these people live in coastal cities, these people live in the high mountains, these people live in marginal rural areas all over the world. It is a problem of today, and this is what we're going to talk about. We have a fantastic panel. And Nabi Agzamov, the head of the Center of Urban Ecology from Stelka KB. He's an architect and an urban resilience expert. He will speak more about his work himself, but he's just an all-around star, and he's working on urban areas in Russia. But he also designed the ecological citizen exhibition at the Venice Biennale of Architecture, which is really a fantastic forum. We have Mona Anand, the Director for Knowledge Research and Research Management at the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, a topic very close to my heart. We try to work a lot at the Aga Khan Development Network on resilient infrastructure, and she will speak about this really important topic. Then we have Yeskin Bulat, Regional Coordinator from the Network of Experts for Sustainable Development in Central Asia. Very nice to see you, Yeskin. He's a well-known manager and an expert in environmental, climate change, water and sustainable development policies in Central Asia and in the former Soviet Union. We overlap because we also work in Central Asia, and Yeskin is working with some of those marginal rural communities that I talked about, and he will speak to us about that. We have Jacqueline Parker, Principal Consultant Environmental Systems Limited, and she is the one who works on agriculture, a very key area. So to start off, I would like to give the audience of this event a sense of what is actually happening in climate change. And the way I'd like to do is I would like each of you, just in one sentence, to explain what aspect of climate change adaptation you focus on in your daily work. So let's start with Nabi. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you for having us. It's quite an honor. I think one of the major challenges that we are facing today, and many times when we think of Russia, we don't consider Russian cities we'll always consider them northern cities. And hot summers is not something that we associate them with usually. But in 2010, heat wave in Russia was called the most deadliest heat wave globally. And in this past summer, we had another record-breaking summer event with heat waves that lasted for weeks, which is an immense pressure on the elderly and people with heart diseases. And what follows after heat waves, we have heavy rains, and around 70% of the monthly normal rain can just fall on the city at once. And obviously, the infrastructure that was designed in the 19th, 20th century cannot handle it. So we have heat waves, heavy rain flooding that subsequently leads to surface runoff and river pollution. And what we were working on, and the initiative that we're working on, is water resilient cities that includes guidelines and design decisions with multiple scales that involve nature-based solutions in order to kind of help hold the surface runoff, filter it, take the pressure off the infrastructure, prevent the cities from the further pollution, and reduce the heat island effect in the process, as well as serving as a public space network.
So. Thank you, Nabi. We'll come back to what exactly you're doing, but cities are heating up. It's difficult for people to live there, and you work to make sure that they can keep living there. So let's go to Mona. I already gave it away. You work on resilient infrastructure, but what does that mean? What does it mean related to climate change?
Thank you, Onur. Greetings, everyone. Infrastructure, by definition, is multi-generational in nature. So, with regard to the entire scenario of uncertainty posed by the climate variability that we are facing now, the challenge really is to not only deal with risk that we've traditionally been accustomed to, but also to deal with uncertainty, which requires us to redefine the metrics when we as we are planning and designing infrastructure systems. And here, by infrastructure, I'm not only referring to the economic infrastructure systems that we see around us, power, telecom, roads, bridges, and others. I'm also talking of social infrastructure, which is around healthcare, around education, and also ecological infrastructure systems. And this whole scenario of uncertainty requires us to invest in redundancies and optionalities that at the coalition we try to bring about by combining solutions around gray infrastructure with green and blue infrastructure, or green, solutions that are green and blue in nature, really. And the other thing that I'd like to share at this point, also with regard to our work, is that we're living in a globalized world, and therefore the infrastructure systems around us are also global in nature. This requires us to, adopt those approaches that allow a global perspective. We've seen the impact of the ship stranded in the Suez Canal last year, the impact on economies, on industries, on supply chains, on people, everything. So those kind of disruptions that happen in one small locale somewhere in the world have an impact across the globe. How do we handle all of that? That is the challenge that we have in front of us at the coalition. I'll pause for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. That's very important. It's an excellent example. We all remember. I think all of us also remember how COVID showed us that if supply chains were disrupted far away, it could actually impact us close to home, on top of the lockdowns that we already had. Let's go to Yeskin Bulat. Yeskin, what aspect are you working on? Really briefly, you'll then get an opportunity to talk more about how in the second round of questions.
Yeah, we are working for Central Asia. It's well-known region with new desert in our planet, Aral Sea Desert, and more than 30 million people now living in this new environmental situation without water, with limited access to energy, and a lot migrations to Russia, to China, to Europe. And we, with my colleague from all Central Asia countries, even Caucasus countries, 8 countries, we initiated simple climate adaptation technology transfer and education. We created database with more than 100 climate adaptation technology to access drinking water, solar energy, and different other technology. Is well known in the world, and less than $100 one technology. And we organized a series of trainings in all Central Asia countries, mostly in local level, in villages, in farmers. And training with different materials using, first of all, YouTube, because video is very simple to explain how you can save water, collect water from rain, and to use solar energy. And now we organized series, more than 50 trainings in all countries in cooperation with local NGOs and local communities. And we are looking for continuation this direction because in addition to different national efforts, but it's mostly on papers, strategies, obligations, and policies, but nobody works with local people. This is our idea. Thank you.
It's a fantastic idea. And by the way, Yeskin has a really good presentation that I think he'll be sharing on the virtual platform, so you can look at it and get more of a feel beyond what we can discuss in the panel. I also love the idea of using YouTube videos. Everything you don't know, you can figure out on YouTube how to do it. So it's a fantastic way to use a tool. That's great work, Yeskin. So let's go to Jacqueline Parker. Jacqueline, what aspect of climate change adaptation are you working on?
So we're working in agriculture, and we're working to create decision tools so that people can evidence when they're planning for taking climate action. So we're really addressing, what will happen to our agricultural land and our natural land as a result of climate change. And can we use land suitability modelling to evidence what will happen so that we can plan for the future? And planning, with evidence, there are really important questions for adaptation to deliver food security, as well as for regional and national sustainable economic development and international trade. All areas are going to be impacted as the climate changes.
Yes, that's very true. You're looking at the food supply and you're trying to figure that out in a scientific way. We'll come back to that, but it's really important and exciting work. We're going to first go back to Nabi. And Nabi, you work on cities. Many people say, well, actually, cities are the biggest emitters. They might be part of the problem. Other people say vigorously, cities are part of the solution because they are more efficient in terms of service delivery. Where do you come out on this? And how are you working this so that cities can be part of the solution rather than part of the problem?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Cities are a significant contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. And in fact, it's 78% of the world's energy consumption, and they produce 60% of greenhouse gas emissions. So we see that this is actually where the mitigation strategies have to occur, decarbonization has to occur. Cities have to decarbonize their energy infrastructure. They have to go away from fossil fuels, reduce their energy demands, become more energy efficient, and improve their public transportation systems. But at the same time, we see that 55% of the world population lives in the cities, and it's projected that more 70% living in the cities by 2050. So not only are the cities the major CO2 or greenhouse gas emission contributors, but also they are at the front lines of climate change ramifications. So they will have to mitigate as well as adapt at the same time. And what we are seeing right now, and we are participating in, is emergence of the nature-based solutions in the urban fabric, right? The green infrastructure, the solutions that will become, they have to become part of the climate action plans and strategies. They have to be adapted as regardless of the federal agenda. Right. So what we saw, for example, in the United States, when Trump announced that they were stepping down from the Paris Agreement, New York announced that they're going to do more than their own share, and on top of that, they will release reports, right, annual reports. So cities might have more power than they might realize. So they can adapt zoning changes and the building code changes and regulation changes that react to specific climate challenges. And we also have to keep in mind that these are the solutions that are multifunctional, right? So they are at the same time tackling public space issues, transportation issues, infrastructure issues, etc. So, this is what we are proposing with every project in the city that we're working with. We are recommending green infrastructure and sustainable urban drainage systems and etc. become part of the urban development strategies. And of course, you have to keep in mind, if you're talking about water, you have to keep in mind that the water does not necessarily follow administrative order logic, but its own logic, the watershed logic. And these decisions have to be scaled up across watersheds rather than maybe sometimes regional borders, right? So this is where another part of the cities will play a crucial role, right? So, for example, the Volga Basin can have a city union that consists of just the cities that are located within the basin itself.
Thank you. That's a great perspective, and there's so much about cities. And the other thing is, when people in other marginal habitats feel they can't live there anymore, say in the mountains, they will go to cities, and then we need to find a way to deal with the impact there. So all these things are very much connected. With that, I want to go back to Mona. Mona, resilient infrastructure, you explained very eloquently how it's all linked, how it's super important. There's, of course, existing infrastructure, some of which is not actually resilient, and a lot of infrastructure to be built, and all the political pressures around the need for infrastructure, which politicians are logically sensitive to because people need roads and bridges and water and all sorts of things that help them in their daily life. So a partnership like yours is really very complex. How do you actually work to bring stakeholders together? How do you work to have impact? How do you get people to listen and act on this extremely important agenda?
Sure. That's actually a very interesting question. So by our identity, our identity is that of a coalition. So by design, we are meant to be working and engaging with a range of actors who are all involved in serving the cause of resilient infrastructure. So we work with national governments, we work with multilateral agencies to co-create and co-facilitate mechanisms that serve this huge calling of resilient infrastructure across the globe. I'll give an example. The Infrastructure for Resilient Island States facility that was just launched last week at the COP, we call it IRIS for short, was co-created by India, by the UK and Australia, together with representatives from small island developing states in the Pacific, the Caribbean, and the Indian Ocean region. So it was actually, this entire mix of stakeholders and actors that came together to dream up and co-create and co-curate this facility. Other actors from these geographies, including the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, the Alliance of Small Island States, the Pacific Islands Forum, and other such actors were very, very actively engaged in the dialogue process of really what kind of a facility should we have that can serve their purpose at the local level. So actually, we're just building on our own strength as a coalition, and our strength lies in our members. That is a much higher level. In more substantive terms, we work with local actors across the value chain of infrastructure systems. And I'll give an example. To promote the resilience of power infrastructure in the Indian state of Orissa, after the cyclone Fani in 2019, we've been engaging with not just policymakers and engineers and designers who are involved in putting together infrastructure systems. We're also engaged with people who are maintaining and operating assets at the local level. All of these actors, we recognize, have a role in resilience building, therefore the need to engage with each of them. For example, simple things like pre-positioning of components like poles and other things that we know will fall if we were to have wind speeds of, let us say, 220 kilometers per hour. We know X number of poles are likely to fall. So if we can pre-position those components, if we can mobilize human resources ahead of time, not only within the state of Orissa, but also the neighboring states and in the region, these kind of things are very, very important to build resilience, even without hardening infrastructure, and you can do it right away. So these are the kind of engagements we undertake, and this allows us to have a full 360-degree view of the problem and also leverage the strengths of various actors that are in our fold. These are just some examples of how we are approaching this whole thing. Thank you.
It's fascinating, Mona. It's a lot of work. Congratulations on the facility for coastal and island states. It's a really big achievement. And I hope soon we'll have a similar facility also for mountain communities, because they have similar needs there at the other end of the front lines of climate change. But it's great that you're achieving this for people on islands. Yes, Ken, you are working with really remote communities in Central Asia, and you're working in different countries. And you already said you created a network, a regional network, which means across countries, to make this work. Can you just explain how this came about and how you managed to create a network from remote people? It's always difficult to connect them, but it's of course very important. So talk us through what got that started and how you've built out the network.
We all Central Asian countries and our neighbors in Caucasus countries, 8 former Soviet countries, they still speaking in one language, in Russian. So this is one, and historically we had before cooperation in different workshops, seminars, especially with UNEP, with UNDP, and other Aga Khan Foundation, different projects, and we had before good relations and friendships. And then when everybody started to talk about, not just to talk, but we can see climate change, we agreed that we need to work in local level and to help the local communities and local NGOs, local farmers, to be prepared for climate change, because in Central Asia, Central Asia countries, it's is the region, according to World Bank estimation, most vulnerable countries. In McKinsey calculated that even by 2030, we will have a 40% deficit of water. And this is very strong signal for all governments and for all economies. And we agreed that we will collect all information about simple and clean and climate adaptation technologies, and to translate all this database in all national languages, and provide free access to this database, and to use local NGOs as local trainers and local farmers who are using already such technology as demonstration places for other peoples. And now we continue this even without special donor support, because it's really needed. And our network and partnership using social network, it's growing very fastly. Thank you.
That's really impressive, and how that works, and I love the practical approach, and also you made a really important point. We're talking about really emergency type situations potentially as close as 2030. Climate adaptation is for now. It's not like somewhere out in the future, although of course in the future it could become even worse, but it is for now, and that's a really important point. So great job on working. But Jacqueline, I do want to talk about the future, because your concept's very simple, figuring out how to adjust agriculture production. Everybody understands conceptually what that means. But how do you actually know what's going to happen to agriculture production as a result of climate change? And how does that inform the work that you do?
Okay, so we use modelling. So we're looking at future climates and what impact that's going to have on land suitability. And we look at that in terms of crops, but we can also equally look at that for forestry and for natural habitats. And we use modelling to answer questions that we need to know about. What's going to happen, where, and by when? And we do this by acquiring knowledge of the growing requirements of crops, so specific crops. And we're talking here about the biophysical conditions, like the optimal conditions for crop growth, what limits whether a crop can be grown in a particular location. So things like temperature, rainfall, soil type and slope. And then we model based on those the land suitability to answer questions like where can this crop be grown and what land is suitable, unsuitable or limited for the production of the crop. We then take that to the next stage and look at what will happen to the growing condition as the climate changes. And we use climate models to do this. But we don't know what the future scenario is going to be. So we look at a range of scenarios from optimistic to pessimistic and over different timescales. So present day right through to 2080. And that generates a set of data and maps about the suitability of the land for the crop sort of going forward, a range of suitabilities. Using Earth observation, or there may be existing maps, we can look at the current distribution of crops and we can start to compare this with the modelled suitability. So I give some examples to try and bring it to life a bit. In Colombia, we looked at bananas nationally. And what we found was the overall area of land that is suitable for banana production will decrease as we go into the future. And then we looked at where bananas are grown commercially at present, and we found that some of the areas were relatively unaffected by future climate change. We also found areas which are going to be quite severely impacted because the length of droughtiness that the bananas are going to be subject to is going to get longer, and that has implications for water use and the cost of producing those bananas. Another example is from Wales, where we are based, where we've actually looked at 120 different crops, trees, and natural habitats. And what we found is that climate change is going to have a big impact. So we always talk about other countries, but, and this is happening everywhere, and it's actually happening now. So it's going to have a big impact on the agriculture and forestry sector here, because the best land, the location of that is changing, both in terms of where it's going to be and the extent of it. And the overall trend is that the land available to agriculture and forestry will decrease. With that, we're going to, there's the disruption and there's going to be competition for land. And those results have been reported to the UK's Climate Change Committee, and they are available under open government licence. In the Caribbean, we've modelled for mangrove re-establishment. We're strong believers in nature-based solutions, and successful re-establishment of mangroves will defend against increasingly frequent extreme storm events. So in that case, looking at the suitability, it was based on the coastal morphology, on the substrate, and the water conditions required by the mangroves. So you can see there's sort of some flexibility in how you can take these approaches forward. And in just looking at what it means for informing adaptation, so considering these changes in land suitability over time, it helps identify conflicts between different land use types. Policymakers and land advisors and businesses can develop adaptation plans based on quantified spatial evidence. So we're producing maps here with specific locations of what will happen, where and when. These can be shared and discussed. The implications for financing, infrastructure planning and farm advice can be considered. And finally, just sort of relating back to Navi and some of the conversations about catchments, I'd just like to sort of finish by saying sustainable agricultural production depends on the supply of natural resources from surrounding natural lands and natural landscapes. And we also need to consider mitigation and adaptation opportunities in these areas if we want successful outcomes in agricultural land. It's really important. We also model for nature-based solutions. When we look ahead, the last thing we want to be doing is planting monocultures of trees in the wrong places in our natural landscapes, because we're going to have detrimental impacts on biodiversity. So what we do in our natural landscapes is really important for what happens in our agricultural landscapes.
Thank you, Jacqueline. That's really very comprehensive, and it's actually fascinating because at the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, we're trying to work with communities in the Hindu Kush, Himalaya, Karakoram, Pamir mountain ranges, and we do exactly the kind of mapping to understand how these communities could keep surviving in the face of climate change. So there's an interesting parallel reality. We're having this conversation right now in the Paris Peace Forum. At the same time, the world leaders are negotiating at the COP, trying to hammer out a deal. Without disrespect to the world leaders, you don't always feel that the sense of urgency in those discussions, because of the political realities, reflects the kind of challenges that you guys talk about, the people you work with, the infrastructure you're trying to save, the agriculture you're trying to protect, the cities that are already in trouble. So all of you work in your own initiatives to push climate change adaptation, which is urgent now. And the question is there anything that you would like the leaders who also participate in the Paris Peace Forum to do, or do you think a bottom-up approach is enough? Is there something that is needed, similar to the COP Accord on mitigation, to give you a better chance of success in climate change in more areas for more people at this crucial time? Yaskin, do you have a view on that?
I worked a long time for government as a national coordinator even for climate change during Kyoto Protocol. And I know that it's all these high-level decisions and legislation, especially very important to support climate adaptation and sustainable development goals. But in our region, it's not quick process between concept, strategy, and reality. So it's a dramatic gap between policy level and concrete level in real human life. That is why we need to use both approaches, bottom up and from down to up approach. And of course, we need to involve more local communities and local people because they have more close relations and dependence from ecosystems. This is very important. It's argument for all our governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaskin. I think you said it all. There's a dramatic gap. There's a need for way more urgency, and that's really crucial. I'd like to bring in questions from the audience rather than systematically go to each of you with the same question. And we got some great questions. The first is clearly for Nabi. The question is, how do you see the future of cities that will be adapting? How do you see urban planning working that? And what does the city of the future look like, given what's coming to us?
Yes, thank you. This is an excellent question. I think the same way that automobile influenced urban planning for the 20th century, the climate adaptation is going to do the same thing to the city planning of the 21st century. And our vision of the future in the previous decades involved flying cars or tall skyscrapers, etc., like more scientific fiction like future. Today we realize in order for us to be in the future, we need to adapt to the climate changes and to the changes that already took the place and to the changes that will be happening, which means increasing the area of the landscape in the city, creating a framework, the blue and green frameworks throughout the entire urban fabrics, right? Increasing the surface that can absorb surface runoff, hold the water, and I think the public will also play a huge role in this process because they will have to apply pressure to the decision makers. And in order for the public to apply the pressure to the decision makers, we as designers have to create this an alternative vision of the future and kind of stepping away from scientific fiction vision of the future and talk about more of a resilient city of the future. So we are also working on such visions, and we actually created a concept of the Moscow in 2050, where we were talking about daylighting the rivers that are buried underground and are kind of buried in the culverts, right, losing their ecological value in the process. They're still there, but they don't have this biodiversity, they don't have this gradient, literal edge, and basically they do not hold the surface runoff. They overfill during the heavy rains and kind of flood the streets. So we envisioned this an alternative vision where the city kind of deculverated or daylighted this river, and which becomes like a framework of connected public spaces, multifunctional public spaces that cools the city down during summer events, summer heat waves, and heavy rain events. Yeah.
Thank you, Nabis. No flying cars, but better drains is one way of summarizing what you said, although what you said had much more color, but it's a very important point, is a very different way of thinking about the future of cities. The next question from the audience, and thank you for coming through with questions, please keep them coming, is for Mona. So Mona, you described how you work with many stakeholders, and somebody in the audience says, well, that's great, but this is so urgent. At the same time, in the reality of politics, people have very urgent infrastructure needs right now, so they might prefer just to build something quickly rather than looking at the resilience of that particular thing or even the resilience of existing infrastructure, because there's a lot of political pressure around infrastructure. So how do you work with decision makers? How do you convince them to actually take the resilience angle rather than the quick win, as politicians like to call it?
That's an interesting question. So, it's, I'm looking for a nice analogy here, but it's, you have to really walk fast, think fast and walk slow. You have to do both, really. That's what I'm trying to say here. So we need something right now, right here. That is absolutely correct. And that's where perhaps the role of the local actors is very, very strong. You were talking of bottom-up approaches, and which is what Yeskin also resonated, as you were mentioning that. The role of people in defining what are the acceptable levels of risk and disruption they are willing to tolerate is very important. That sort of sets the agenda for what performance are we looking at. That's the starting point for here and now. And then, of course, there are ways of looking at service continuity planning by looking at mobilizing of surge capacity, pre-positioning and stockpiling components required for infrastructure. All that is there. But in the long run, we have to look at how do we build resilience in a more methodical manner. I'll give you an example. If you look at various countries, including India, a lot of investment, via things like the national infrastructure pipeline, and those kind of portfolios are existing in many countries. If we could bring in a resilience perspective to those investments, then we are really talking of long-term sustainability of these investments, the longevity of the assets that are being created, and the resilience of infrastructure systems as such. So we have to act now, and we need local actors to be mobilized to come together to take care of the here and now, and in the long run, because the future is happening as we are speaking right now. So in the long run, to take care of the future, it's important to engage with policymakers to make sure investments are well-founded and they are risk-informed. Now, that takes us to another issue, which is with regard to availability of data for risk analytics and evidence-based to design those policies. Do we have them? No, not just yet. So we need to invest energies in various dimensions of decision-making for now and for the future. We need to have the evidence base to make decisions for now and in the future and get these actors to come together and work together.
Wow, you got a lot of
I don't know
work to
whether
do.
that answers the question.
But it shows the challenge, and I would almost say we need like a adaptation COP to bring the world together on this, because this is a huge agenda with similar political problems as the COP Accord itself on mitigation, and it's, I don't know, it's equally important as I see it. So anyway, another question, Jacqueline. Somebody in the audience would like to know, how does this differ between countries? And since you work with Colombia, with the Caribbean, with Wales, is there a different sense of urgency between typologies of countries, if that's a fair way of describing it? And how do they engage on this?
Okay, so I would say there's a common sense of urgency between countries in terms of when you work in regional or on project-based contexts. It's very clear that usually there are already issues with environmental issues like flooding, soil erosion, and so on. So those are common, but they are going to get worse, and people know they're going to get worse. I'd say the differences probably come in perhaps the complexity of putting together the network of participants to take action, because the decision tools that we have are for taking action. We use them in coastal areas, rural areas, cities, and it's getting that network, the right network of actors together. We bring a methodology, but actually we rely very much on people locally to formulate the needs and to take the information that we provide through to local action and all the stages locally of engagement with usually quite a lot of stakeholders to achieve that. That's more difficult in an international context for us than it is perhaps here locally in Wales, but we've done it, it's doable.
Thank you. No, that's great. We're almost out of time, and you guys on the panel have just really been great. I want to give Yeskin the last opportunity to say something. And what I would like you to very quickly, in 1 or 2 sentences, say. You said, you know, enormous water shortages already by 2030. You're building your platform. You're doing this very practical approach. What do you hope to achieve to help improve the situation of your stakeholders by 2030? What are you hoping to achieve in the next couple of years? 2 sentences, please.
I hope that all people in our region, including high mountains people from Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, in desert countries like Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, will be prepared for climate change with simple technologies, best practices, and all will be united by social networks to exchange information, experience, and best knowledge. This is, I think it's possible. Doesn't matter what government doing, how many obligations they will take, because people living on the ground and they will need help. Thank you.
That's fantastic, and we should touch base offline because we work in some of the same areas, and I hope the same as you. So that's it for the discussion. Nabi, Mona, Yeskin, Jacqueline, thank you really very much. For the audience, climate change adaptation is for now. It is as urgent as mitigation. We really need a parallel process, a parallel COP, because grassroots is great, but all governments in the world should work on this right now. Even if we stopped emitting tomorrow, these problems would still be there. We need to work them. And it's fun. I want to thank the Paris Peace Forum for having the vision to allow us to talk about it. Thank everybody for a very lively discussion, fantastic contributions, and for the great work you're doing on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you.